And Ian almost needs no introduction. What can I say? Rancher, school board member, Wall of Honor recipient, and someone it's a pleasure to work with all the time. So I'm going to just leave it at that, Ian, and have you take over.
I got a lot to live up to. I don't have a presentation. That's probably not my bailiwick. But I guess, well, you have two ranchers here today to talk to you about how we use science and how we apply it to our ranching operations. By way of background, I manage the Vera, Earl, the Empire Ranch, and the Sands Ranch that are all in this watershed. Half the Sands Ranch is in the watershed, I should say. We manage them all differently, as far as rotation, as far as how we run cattle on different topographies, different grasses, and a little bit of different philosophies. The one thing that is probably constant in all of it is that we use science to base all of our decisions. Whether it be a rotation a year out, whether it be when we're going to move the cattle on a short-term basis, and then after we're in there to see how we did as far as utilization. And so there's, I don't know what to do with it. Here's my proof. That's the, those are the slides for me. Remember what I'm talking about. One of the questions was, how is science useful for us as ranchers? And it's twofold. One, it is key in making decisions for us. But two, it gives us the data and the support to make those decisions. So we're not just flying blind, telling someone or telling the public or telling a federal agency or state agency, well, there's enough grass in here, so we're going to put 200 cows because we have the experience and you guys are never out here. So, and that's not the case. So now with annual monitoring, and then we do we look at production. We don't always do a production analysis, but we'll look at production every year before we go into a pasture. So now with all that data, we can go to the agencies and say, here's what we're thinking, here's what we want to do, and then if they want to see something further, we can go take them out and show them things. We can show them the data we've gathered. In BLM's case on the Empire, they've got a lot of data, way more data than my brain can handle. So we kind of parse through some of it and use that to determine how we're going to raise cattle out there. Most, the Empire with BLM is a little bit of a different scenario than it is on the other allotments that we have. We have state allotments and forest allotments. The Empire is a special case in the sense that a lot of data is already gathered, and BLM has it, and so it's a little bit more of a working. It's not a little bit more. It is a working group that everyone gets together and discusses what we're seeing, and it's not just the cattle side. I'm a small part of it, or I've become a small part of the discussion out there, which is nice. So we discuss what we're going to do. On the other allotments, it's more of one meeting. This is what you have. Here's our data. Here's what we want to do. If they have questions, then we answer the questions. But we use Dan Robinette, who I'm sure is here somewhere, as our consultant. And he and I and state land and BLM oftentimes will go out 4 or 5 times a year and check different things, whether it be utilization or production, or just areas of concern, things we might want to change. You know, we have, when we graze on any piece of land, you know, we really have 3 objectives: the ecosystem health, the health of the cattle, and make sure you're maximizing all of your production on cattle, on our cattle that we have out there. Because in the end, this is a business. We're here to make money. We're not here to do this just because it's fun. And it's been fun the last month. And to that end, the financial impact for us has been based upon the science that we've now involved ourselves in, the data that we have available to us, has had a huge positive financial impact on our ranching operations down here. Just because, for planning purposes, if you have that information and that data, you can make plans that always get screwed up 3 to 6 months in, but at least you have a plan. And when you can plan that, you can plan your numbers, you can run a budget out a year, kind of have an idea of how much or what this operation down here is going to bring to our bottom line. Without that data and without that science, it's a lot of guesswork. You just, one, you don't have the peace of mind that the agencies are fully on board. Because if you're just telling them something, I mean, I think my word's really good, but if I'm just telling an agency, I think this, there's always question marks, right? But if I tell an agency or ask an agency, here's what I want to do, and here's why. Here's our annual data, here's our production data, here's our utilization levels from 3 or 4 years ago when we grazed these pastures, and here's our count numbers, then that sounds a lot more solid to go forward with. And then from a business standpoint, with that, I know that I can count on being able to in this operation down here, have this many calves that come out of that, and then it's just a budget analysis from there. So that's probably one of the bigger impacts, and it's not directly correlated to the grass on the ground or the ecosystem, if you will, but it's probably one of the bigger impacts that we've had from the science and the monitoring. And again, I mean, I'm not smart enough to understand 20% of it. I just understand the stuff that pertains to me, and then some corollary stuff that we have to be aware of. But, are there any questions? Yeah.
Well, what is the cattle ranching community doing as regards to invasive grasses and invasive plants? I guess because a lot of them, not all, were brought by the cattle ranching industry. Are taking specific steps, not modern ones, of course, but historically.
We just graze them. You know, I don't. You talking about layman's love grass or mesquite?
Those would all be included.
You know, layman's. I joked about just grazing it, but literally that's what you're doing. I mean, you're taking some steps, and I can't speak for the whole community. I mean, this is just what we do. You know, we're in predominantly layman pastures. We might graze them differently. We might graze them seasonally differently. So layman's will green up earlier in the spring, and it'll stay green later in the fall. And so if we have a pasture that's within our rotation that we can use at those time periods, or leave cattle a little longer to take advantage of the layman's, we will. Secondly, I mean, in some of the layman's areas, you know, we're really watching our natives to make sure that when we do utilization, we're doing a species-specific utilization. So when when we go through, we'll take how much layman's is being utilized, but we'll also look at blue grama, black grama, whatever other native species are there. And we're fairly cognizant of what we're grazing, how much we're grazing, and when to move, or when that utilization level gets too high in that time period. As far as mesquite, BLM's done a lot of work on the Empire with removing mesquite, which has been great. I can stand on my pulpit and say one thing. I'd say we do a whole lot of maintenance on the areas that the BLM's cleared. I won't get there, don't worry. And then on the Vera Earl, which is some deeded and then forest, we've cleared about 3,000 acres of mesquite, and we'll go back in and spray it next year, all 3,000 acres, as a maintenance program. And that's been with the partners, I'm going to botch it, but U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners Program, in conjunction with some water work for the Chiricahua leopard frog as well. So we're not just ignoring it, I guess is a long-winded way of saying it. We're dealing with it. But then I think we have a little, we're realistic, or I'm realistic about our chances of getting rid of layman's, or our chances of completely eradicating mesquite where it shouldn't be. It's not going to happen. It's more of a maintenance program, and making sure that you don't have adverse effects to native grasses and shrubs. Yeah.
You mentioned business side and the health of your cattle. Have you been able to detect any relationship between forage utilization and standing forage and the weight gains or the weight for your cattle?
Yes, but we don't correlate it to weight gains because it's a cow-calf operation out here.
I see.
So, you know, really what our barometers are pounds weaned per cow exposed,
Okay.
and our pregnancy rate, and then our weaning rate percentage-wise to our pregnancy rate in the fall.
And you're seeing no relationship?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, they all coincide. You know, I don't think we've really grazed off an area in the Latin, someone was going to tell me I'm wrong, but 3 or 4 years on any of the ranches. And, you know, through the winter and the spring, you're really looking at your cow health, your cow body condition score, whether they have a fat layer over their spine, whether you can see their 12th or 13th rib, whether they have a fat layer over their hip points. And so that's more of a measure to me in the winter months than anything. And that'll correlate to whether you're short on grass for sure. Because if they start having to walk tons for feed and they're not getting it, you know, you're going to see that. And you can get into situations like that. We're not perfect for sure, but you can get into situations like that higher up on the empire where you don't have as much cover or as much production, and you have some cattle that don't know the area, and they'll sit in an area that gets grazed out. So you have to make some changes that way. Yeah.
Did you have any extensive comments you wanted to make on climate change?
Anyone else? I'll get to you. Let me answer her question. I didn't look.
I know.
It's my slide. No, we don't have the flexibility or the luxury to sit around and hypothesize about what might happen and what could happen in 20 or 30 years or 40 years or 50 years. We, fortunately or unfortunately, have to live in the now, in the next year or two. And so climate change, or whatever someone wants to call it, right? We're adapting to it as we go. We're adapting to it on an annual planning basis, and we're adapting to it on a daily to a monthly to a every 3-month basis. You know, if the weather is the one unknown, we can plan till we're blue in the face about how we're going to move cattle and what our plans are. And you know, on the 5 ranches down here, I think we've had plans, and I don't think we've ever adhered to one of them the whole year. I mean, not in some instances, not even close. Well, this year, not even anywhere close. And you just have to, being open-minded, being willing to look at something and say, you know what, this isn't working, no matter how much you like the plan, and being able to change it, it's essential. And then, then to think long-term on the infrastructure changes you can make to your ranch, and maybe types of cattle movements, so that when you get in a situation where the weather's not cooperating with your plan, you're able to make changes and moves that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to 5 or 7 years ago. And so that's, I mean, we don't think of it as we're doing this for climate change, right? We're doing this so that we are more flexible and better able to adapt to any type of weather change that occurs 1 year, 5 year, 10 years down the road. That encompasses putting water lines in, putting new waters in different spots to spread cattle out, adding fences to areas so that you get utilization in areas you otherwise wouldn't. You know, and then it goes on to daily moving supplement feed every 2 or 3 weeks, or putting it in areas that the cattle aren't using, and then moving your cattle, you know, knowing where your cattle are going to graze at different times of the year. Cattle are going to graze the harder areas when they're earlier in their pregnancy and they're not lactating. So what we try to do on a lot of the ranches is we're going to push them up high to rougher areas and areas that otherwise won't get used, you know, when they're month 8 or 9 in their pregnancy, knowing full well that they're going to move down on their own to the lower country, to the lower parts of those pastures when they hit that time to calve. And so that's just part of your planning process. Okay, is that good enough? Yeah.
Simple. How do you manage cattle in a wildfire?
She asked, how do we manage cattle in a wildfire?
Yeah.
When it's burning?
Yeah.
Well, first you hack off every firefighter you can find because you're out there and you're not supposed to be. You do a lot of praying. That fire, the sawmill fire, burned through a lot of our winter country. It's 700 hectares up there at the time. Everything came out fine. I didn't lose anything. A few burned ears, a few sore feet, but other than that. So you know, if you have something in the line of the fire, you move it as best you can. If you can't move it, you open gates. Cattle are way smarter than we give them credit for. And I learned that in spades this year. When they can get in trouble is when they're in flat pastures. The pictures you might see from Kansas or North Texas or Oklahoma, they get wadded up in a corner. That's when they'll die. And so you try and avoid that. This fire that just burned 2 days ago, we had cattle in the pasture that had jumped the highway into and had to move them on horseback pretty quick. So if you can do that, you get to it. So. Another slide. The last question was what do we need from scientists? You know, I don't know, really. We're getting a lot of the data we need. I'd die for a better weather forecast. It's a little more accurate, frankly, but other than that, by and large, we're getting the data we need to make the decisions we do, and then to be able to work with the government agencies. You know, in fact, sometimes it can be a little too complicated for what we need. I mean, I'm sure there's other purposes for a lot of the data, but for what we need, pretty simple.
Let me just throw a quick question. I know how the data gets collected on Empire, but on your other ranches, are government agencies doing that, or are you guys?
Both. We work with NRCS on the Vera, Earl, and the Forest Service, and then on the sands, we're part of the CRMP that Kim talked about. And so it's us, Pima County, Forest Service, and Extension. Yeah.
So you said in terms of what you need from scientists, you're getting the data that you need. Can you think of other needs, not data related, that scientists, so broadly speaking, could address? Maybe communication or advocacy, I don't know, I'm thinking like those kinds of more abstract.
Yeah, I'd love some advocacy, but you gotta believe in what you're advocating for. And so people are gonna naturally do that on their own. If they believe in what's going on or what we're doing on the Empire, the Vera, or the sands, and they're gonna talk about it. And that kind of works for us for advocacy. We believe in what we're doing on all of the ranches, and we'll take anyone out there and show them and explain to them why. And we may have disagreements on subtle things, but by and large, I think they may not agree with cattle ranching or cows, but they agree that the ecosystem's healthy and